Phill Holloway, former assistant district attorney, former police officer, and legal advisor to Georgia's Sheriff's Department. Phill, pick this up where Alexis was reporting. The gun is very unusual. It seems to be a modern version of of a well-rod pistol, which was developed for the British Special Operations Executive, which was Churchill's secret army. It is a bolt-action suppressed pistol, or a modern version of that, where it's designed to have a silencing effect. It's a weird gun, and it would be easy to trace if that indeed is the modern version of that very somewhat rare bolt-action pistol from the 1940s.
Yeah, Dagan, great to be with you. That well-rod gun is, in fact, very, very unusual. It was described as the perfect, assassin's weapon. So if, in fact, that's what the gun was, and it looks like that to me as well, it's not something that's widely sold, okay? And so that's the kind of thing that authorities, particularly like the DEA and the ATF, they can go in and check these records to see who might have been in there buying a weapon like that. But if you take it a step further, in law enforcement cases like this, you always have to start at the center and work out. So that means not only from the victim himself, look at his phone, his electronics, work outward and talk to the people that are in his life and perhaps eliminate them as potential suspects, but the alleged shooter as well, Dagan. Now that we know probably that he traveled to New York from here in Atlanta, just a couple of miles from where I'm sitting now, I can tell you that Atlanta, like New York, has a very robust crime camera system, and the Greyhound station is in an area of Midtown where there's lots of high-rise buildings, lots of corporate offices, lots of other types of businesses. All of those places also have private security. So at some point, when you go backwards in time from this assassination, and that's what it was, he probably has let his guard down. He's had an interaction. He's taken an Uber. He's bought a sandwich somewhere. He's used a credit card. He's used his own phone. And not to mention, we've got his face. Family, people know him, his friends, acquaintances, probably prior coworkers, they know him. Law enforcement, if they don't already have his name, and I think they might, they are going to have it very soon, because he's not a professional in the sense that, he covered his tracks back that far.
Right, and he, according to reports, took an Uber back to the hostel the second night that he checked back in. And, of course, UnitedHealthcare would have a giant security unit and would be able to provide any information to the NYPD and investigators about threats to the CEO in prior days, weeks, months, even years. But moving on to this, Phill, President Biden's pardon of his son, Hunter, has won Democrats saying that the standards should apply to both sides. Here's Senator John Fetterman.
It's undeniable that the case against Hunter Biden was really politically motivated, but I also think it's true that the trial in New York for Trump, that was political as well too. Now it's that, and in both cases, I think a pardon is appropriate. We cannot allow these kinds of institutions to be weaponized against our political opponents, and it's very clear both trials were politically motivated and weaponized.
A new piece with the headline, "The liberal media lays groundwork for mass pardons of deep state minions." And apparently Biden's team is listening. That comes after reports that Biden's White House is considering preemptive pardons for people who they think President-elect Trump could target. Names include Dr. Tony Fauci, Senator-elect Adam Schiff, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Mark Milley. The Wall Street Journal editorial board argues this, quote, "Preemptive pardons for outgoing officials would be a bad precedent, a constitutional abuse, and the next lawfare escalation. It would establish a precedent that presidents on their way out the door will grant immunity to lists of loyal staff and officials. If Biden really wants to cool the political temperature, he could pardon Trump for 2 federal cases. This would be a political olive branch that might stop the reprisal ratchet." Phill, broad pardons to people who haven't been charged with any crimes, that would, in the future, anybody who went to work in an administration, particularly a Democrat one, would just think that they could get away with, well, maybe murder while they were working there, and then they would be pardoned for what they might have been caught doing.
Well, yeah, certainly that type of pardon is not what the founders surely envisioned when they gave the chief executive of the United States, such broad and plenary pardon power. I'm sure this kind of thing never crossed their mind, or maybe they would have made it a little less broad. But nevertheless, let's just take, for example, Tony Fauci, right? All those people that you mentioned, including him, have denied that they have done anything wrong. They've denied any federal criminal activity whatsoever. So if Joe Biden were to go so far as to preemptively pardon an Anthony Fauci, for example, history will forever judge him as being someone who needed a pardon. In other words, he had done some particular federal crime for which he needed a pardon. He's vehemently denied that, but others have said, look, he could be indicted for maybe lying to Congress. People say that maybe he committed some type of mass fraud by lying to the American people about masks, vaccines, social distancing, school closing, and the whole thing like that. So history will forever judge Anthony Fauci and the others as people who needed a pardon because they had committed a federal crime. And that's not what these people want.
Senator Rand Paul last year did make an official criminal referral about Tony Fauci's testimony to Congress. Just noting that. Phill Holloway, thank you so much. Good to see you, sir.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.